Welcome to the Modern Arizona podcast. Today's episode is a little different. It's from one of our live events with the Modern Divorce Navigator, designed to make divorce less stressful and more manageable. If you enjoy the podcast, don't forget to subscribe. And if you're curious about the Navigator, check out the link in the description. We'd love to have you join us. Now, let's dive back into the episode.
All right. Hello, Modern Divorce Support Group. My name is Billie Tarascio, owner of Modern Law, and today I am joined by a local therapist here in the Phoenix area. Mesa, Phoenix, you work in both, is that right?
Correct, yes.
Rebecca Mecham, and we're going to talk today about trauma and healing from trauma, which is something that I feel like every single parent who goes through a divorce has a kid who has experienced some trauma. I really do.
Yeah.
So,
you can't help but have that, I think, from just the experience of that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I just think like denying that a divorce is traumatic, no matter how friendly you are as a couple, like does your kids no favors. And I just think the more we can kind of lean into that and let them have that, which can be guilt inducing.
Mm-hmm. Which is interesting that it's guilt-inducing because we don't feel a lot of guilt like when our kid falls down and scrapes their knee when they're out and just exploring the world, right? We see that as an opportunity to go ahead and offer comfort or to teach them self-soothing skills in those moments. But it's when it becomes that emotional that we start to do that internal shaming. And so it's interesting, right? If we can conceptualize it from the standpoint of this isn't something we did to them any more than when we let them run out and play and they scrape their knee.
Oh, that's interesting. So because it feels almost impossible not to feel responsible for the trauma when we, the adults in their life, went through the divorce. And you're suggesting, like, let that go.
I'm suggesting, I don't think we can let it go, right? I'm suggesting that we reframe how our kids are experiencing that and doing it less about us and more about their experiences.
Yeah. I have to catch myself on this. And my kid, we went through a divorce like 5 years ago, but I still have to remind myself not to try to just understand that my job is just to support them in whatever their experience was and not reframe it. That's okay. That's all right.
What?
So tell us then, as parents, what are some really great ways that we can support our kids through the trauma of divorce? And we can separately deal with blended family issues, which are major, but let's just talk about the divorce. How can parents help support their kids through that trauma?
I think one of the greatest tools in helping support kids as a parent is, regardless of what it is curiosity. We come into it oftentimes imposing our own script, our own narrative on the situation. And then our kids are having to try and conform or fit their narrative into the story we're putting in front of them. Instead of being curious about what our kids are expecting, we're almost writing their story, telling them what we think they should be expecting. And so I think coming at this from a place of curiosity and letting go of the expectations, because it may just be, if we're going with the analogy that we talked about, a kid can fall off his bike and he can break his arm, or he can scrape his knee, or he can really not get hurt at all. And if we're, when we go over to assess when they fall, we're doing that from a place of curiosity to see what's hurting, right? If we did that same type of approach with emotional, to just say, hey, what's hurting, or is anything hurting, right? Because they may get ready to just jump back up on the bike and go, or they may need some extra support and go get the arm set, or in that case, go see a therapist that they need, some professional help to be able to get that wound healed.
When you're saying that, and it reminds me of my 3-year-old niece, and she fell off my trampoline, and I was watching her, and so I was horrified. And I'm going over there, and I'm picking her up, and I'm like, how are you? Are you okay? How's your arm? Did you hit your head? And she just kept yelling at me, I fell off the tramp. Did you see me? She was so why are you talking about my arm or my head? I experienced the trauma of falling off the trampoline. And that's what she wanted to talk about. It was just
Yes.
such an interesting, like, it was such an interesting thing for me as an auntie to be like, wow, okay, we really need to talk about, like, she wanted to talk about the emotional impact of falling off this
Yes.
trampoline.
Right. Like that was super scary, right?
Yeah,
Nothing hurts, but
right.
that was took me outside of we and I'm going to go into a place here where I'm not real knowledgeable, but
Yeah.
we think about sensory experiences from the concept of sight, sound, hearing, all of that. But there's also the sensory, and I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, of our body in space. And
Yes.
then there's the sensory experience of knowing what's happening internally within us. And those two sensory experiences, we don't really talk about that. But as you're talking about your niece falling off, right? Those are the two that she's talking about. It wasn't sight, sound. And our body, the way that we process information is through sensory input. And
Mm-hmm.
we forget about those two sensory inputs, what we know internally
Mm-hmm.
and connecting to that, and then where our body is in relation to the spatial experience that we're having,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And those can be really, because we don't think about them very often. And so it's kind of like, no, I'm focused on what might be broken or what might be hurt or injured. And we
Right.
don't think about those things can be injured too. The same way we can injure our hearing if we listen to music too loud or, that kind of a thing. Those sensory inputs can be damaged as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so approach our children's experiences with curiosity. That's
Oh yeah.
tip number one. Can you
But
give?
you've got to do so much internal work for yourself. I mean, it sounds super easy, right? But when again, if we talk about this, when you see your kid fall off the trampoline here, right? You get emotionally elevated, and you, as the adult, have to emotionally de escalate so that you can approach with curiosity. Because when you're in that fight, flight, or freeze system, which happens when you get elevated like that, the curiosity part of your brain, it's not working, right?
Okay. So this so much happens when parents have conflict with their children, right? So, we as parents can have conflict with our children and feel very elevated from this conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, we can become, it's really hard to approach anything with curiosity when you're angry with your child for being bratty or rebellious or not following the rules.
Yeah, when you're feeling emotionally elevated, it's not the curiosity. See, we have two systems that work like a dance, in your autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic system and the sympathetic system. The parasympathetic is your kind of your rest and digest. Your sympathetic is your fight, flight, or freeze. And when your kid's being bratty at you, right, you tend to go towards that fight, flight, or freeze system. You get that emotionally elevated, and you've got to figure out what are those cues that happen for me
Mm-hmm.
that I can tap into, that I am in that place of fight, flight, or freeze, because I can't approach things curious. Because think about it for a second. That system's designed to keep us alive. So I'm not going to get curious when I'm out in the forest and I encounter a bear. I'm not curious. I just need to get out of there so that I can survive, right? And the body doesn't recognize the difference between physical threat or emotional threat. It just recognizes threat.
Okay.
And so whether we encounter the bear or we're encountering an emotional bear, right? Whatever that looks like, our body registers that and we go into that fight, flight, or freeze system. And the parts of the brain that are curious, that problem solve, that can really do the complex thinking, those go offline.
Okay, so then when our kids are being, bratty or rebellious, we have to get ourselves grounded. But of course, they're not grounded at that point, right? They
Mm-mm.
are elevated. So what do you suggest we do, especially when, you've got kids who are traumatized and we're trying to help our kids who are traumatized?
Right. So when the best thing to do in those moments is, one, model what you're wanting them to do, which is saying, oh, I'm recognizing right now I'm not responding the way I want to respond to
Mm-hmm.
you.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that I'm in a place that I can do that right now. So I'd like to take some time to get myself in a place that I'm giving you the response that I want to be giving you,
Mm-hmm.
not just reacting. And so that is, I think, the biggest key. But sometimes we're so stressed with, I don't know, holidays and shopping and cooking and bills and flu and whatever
Mm-hmm.
else, right? We forget to listen.
Mm-hmm.
And the practice of yoga often talks about, I do a lot of, well, not as much as I want to, but who does? Um, the more you think you don't have time for yoga, the more you need to make time for yoga.
Where do you go?
Oh,
Which place do you like?
um, I love Meta Yoga in Phoenix.
Mm,
They have a couple of locations.
cool.
And so, um, I, when practicing, if you're going to actually practice yoga, you want to go to, from my experience, I go to a yoga studio because they're practicing the concepts of yoga,
Right.
not just yoga for exercise.
Not just the moves and the flexibility, but the mindset. I agree like that. Oh, yoga's so great because you feel like you're doing everything at once.
You do.
The
Yeah.
strength training, the flexibility, and the mental reset. It feels like such a good use of time, really.
It's the ultimate multitasker. And
Right?
yet it's the thing teaching you to not multitask. And
Right.
so the very thing that you're feeling like, oh, we need to get this solved now. My kid's erupting, their homework is due, and bedtime was 3 hours ago, and all of this type of thing, right? The project is the deadline of the project of school, whatever. It's all feeling like it's just crumbling down. That's when it's time to slow it down, because now you're not thinking, you're just reacting. And so when I say, I'm laughing because I'm like, I think we hit this backwards, because when I say start from curiosity,
Yeah.
like that seems to be the end goal. And so we need to
Okay.
right? Like that's the end goal, is to be curious. And so I'm like, that sounds super easy. And that's actually the really hard part to get to, as I'm,
I see. So setting up the environment to where everybody can be in the right headspace. That's the thing. Like when you take your kids to counseling, it's kind of like when you go to yoga. Everybody is prompted and prepped by the action of getting to counseling, getting to therapy, sitting in the thing, making time
mm-hmm,
for the exchange.
yes.
But I really do think that, like, if parents can do it, it's probably more effective than therapy a half an hour a week,
Oh, heck yeah.
right? But how do we create those conditions?
You start with yourself.
Okay.
The same way when you're on an airplane and they tell you to put your own mask on first, right? And the reason why we have to tell us that is because as parents, we instinctually will want to put it on our kids first, right? And if we don't put it on ourselves, we're going to pass out and we're going to be of no use to anyone. And so you have to start with your own. And this means you're going to model for them the behavior that you're wanting them to see, right? You're going to start to recognize it in yourself and say it out loud that, oh, I see that I'm elevated right now and I'm yelling and I don't want to be yelling. And so the only way I can do that, stop that, is just to separate right now, so that I stop, so that I can give myself space to be able to rethink. Can you give me 10 minutes? And then you have some tools, and there's some tricks that I can show you that can help with helping to help you feel grounded, right? Like there's some things you can do that will bring that down. It doesn't, and when I say bring it down, it doesn't mean you don't feel it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It means that you can now feel it at a level that is manageable.
Mm-hmm.
It's so those two different systems, the fight, flight, or freeze, or the rest and digest systems, they have dimmers on them, right? And
Okay.
usually when we go over, it goes over in full blast, but we need to bring the dimmer and adjust the dimmer down on whichever system we're using, so that we are controlling that toggle. And so there's some things you can do as a parent or as a human being. It's not just a parent, right? But there's things you can do, like, have you ever eaten an orange before, Billy? Okay. So imagine that you are, and if you're comfortable, we can close your eyes, but imagine that you're holding an orange.
Oh, I will totally do this. Okay.
Okay. And just, I want you to scan your body for a second and just notice how your shoulders feel. Notice how your stomach feels. Notice how your neck feels. Notice anything in your jaw, that type of thing. Now think about this orange and imagine biting into the orange, not just a bite, just enough to open the skin just a little bit. And you get that little bit of oil and juice and it's sweet for just a second, right? And you can smell the orange. And then imagine that you peel that orange and you're getting that smell and that taste. You can almost taste the smell. It's so sweet and it's got tangy to it. Now imagine yourself getting one of the slices off and it's just perfect. You put it in your mouth and you bite it. And you get that squirt of orange juice in there. And as you go through that squirt of orange juice and the tang in there and you bite on it and you can taste it and you've got the flavor in there. Now, as you think about that orange, think about how do your shoulders feel right now? How does your jaw feel? How does your stomach feel? This is what we call a grounding sensor, a sensory grounding technique.
Mm-hmm.
In that sense, you're using taste from the sense of you're thinking about what taste feels like.
Mm-hmm.
You're using smell. You held it in your hand,
Mm-hmm.
right? All of that, all of those things of sensory. You can also do things like one of them is imagine you're trying to describe, I'll just pick this, right? Carmex lip gloss. Imagine you're trying to describe this to somebody who cannot see, right? And so you're going to go through and you're going to be like, it's about 3 inches long by maybe an inch wide. It's a bright yellow color. There's a roundish kind of dome-like red cap on the end. The cap's probably about a 3/4 of an inch in diameter. And so you're just going through all of the very minute details as if you were describing this item to someone who can't see.
Mm-hmm.
You can do the same thing with sound or with taste. I like to get a bunch of Tic Tacs. I have a bunch of Tic Tacs on my nightstand or in my office. And I take a bunch of different Tic Tacs that I don't know all the different flavors, and I mix them all up in a bowl, and then I'll put them back into a Tic Tac thing. And then I put a Tic Tac that I close my eyes, put one Tic Tac on my tongue, and I roll it around to the front, to the back, to the side, to be able to, what flavor am I actually tasting?
Mm-hmm. So you're just like checking in with your body, challenging your body, connecting your body to your mind.
Yes. And to the present moment.
Yeah.
And all of those things will slow this down and bring down those emotions to a place that now I can rationally, and that other part of my brain that wasn't on before, I can now access that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel any different in terms of what, I still feel irritated that my kid was being, reactive with me. Like that's not, but now I'm in a more calm state.
Mm-hmm.
And now I can think about how do I want to approach that?
Okay. And then are those exercises that you would suggest parents do with kids as well?
I think that it's helpful to teach kids how to do them. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
If if you have the type of relationship with the kiddo that you can say in the moment when we're elevated, hey, do you want to do a grounding sensory with me, or do you want to do it by yourself, or do you, whatever. I personally like a jar myself and grab out I have a bunch of the popsicle sticks, and my kids would grab one of those out to help them tell them which sensory ground, which grounding tool to use so that they didn't have to think about it.
Sure.
Something like that, right? So that there's not a power struggle that's happening.
Right. Very cool. Okay, I want to get into some of the questions that have come in from our group. The
Sure.
first one is, how do I recognize if I or my children are experiencing trauma from our custody conflict, and then what are the first steps to address it? I feel like you've a little bit answered that.
So the sometimes you don't know that it comes from the custody and divorce, right? I recently injured my knee, but I didn't know that it was my knee for about 3 weeks after, because it was my hip that was hurting, because my hip was compensating. And so sometimes it can be that it is from transitioning from a two-parent home to a single parent home, but we might see it in behaviors at school.
Yeah.
Right? And so we think that it's something with school, but then we address the issues at school, but something's still not working. And so again, they may not have the words for it, but if we keep staying in that place of curiosity and not tell them what they're experiencing, not tell them, what this might be, because it may just be school.
Totally.
Right?
Or a friend drama, or
Right.
like their world is not our world. It's really easy to
Right.
project.
Exactly. And so again, if we can come at it from a place of curiosity, right? But it could be that place where it sounds, it's initially it's they're talking about school, but then it's just that they're not feeling supported by having two parents to help them with homework anymore, right? And so that's just, again, listening. And I've yet to meet a kiddo that doesn't have some pretty dang good ideas when left to their own devices to think about what might be able to help remedy this.
Yeah.
But the key to that is being open to exploring, and that doesn't mean that they get to set the stage of
Right.
if I ask for this, I get this, right? We still have the ability as parents and the responsibility as parents to let them to have boundaries, right? So they could be like, well, if I only had the scientific calculator to resolve that. Well, if I don't have the $200 that the scientific calculator is needed to buy at that moment, right? We've got to problem solve this together in a different way. Like, I know that would be really nice if you had that better calculator, and we can work towards that, but that's not an option right now. So what else might be helpful, right? And you can brainstorm with them, but that doesn't mean that, and brainstorming is, I like the rule in brainstorming that there is no wrong idea or bad idea, right? Because you never know what's going to spar off of that.
Right.
But we shut it down oftentimes in lieu of trying to, especially if we are feeling shame around like limited resources. I don't have the $200, and so it's like, so we'll shut down the conversation, the curiosity. Curiosity, though. I mean, I wish I could just bottle this and give it, feed it to us, because it really is the place of where our growth happens.
Sure.
Right? And where that growth in relationship connection happens. Because when you're curious about another human being, it's really a validating experience for that human being to be seen that way.
Yeah. It really is. Like, so often people don't feel listened to or heard or understood, and it's such a gift. Yeah. But we have to slow down, because obviously we think we're better problem solvers than our kids. We just do. but I have really stubborn kids. So if it's their idea and if I have their buy-in, I am just like 10 times more likely to get a solution that actually sticks,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. But if we can also, I think, remember that behavior is a form of communication, right? And so, especially like when you're talking about kids 3-4 years old, right? But we forget that when they're 13, 14, 15 years old. And they have greater language skills. We're more tolerant of behaviors at 3-4 years old, 2, 3, 4 years old.
Yeah.
Because they are still developing those language skills, right? And somehow we think that when, add 10 years and put them 12, 13, 14, that they've got, just because they can say the words doesn't mean that they can't, there's a real skill to be able, for kids to be able to well, in adults, let's be honest, for humans to be able to put
Mm-hmm.
words to their feeling experience.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so we oftentimes behave our feelings
Sure.
rather than speak our feelings.
Yeah.
And so if we can just get curious about what that behavior is about, right?
So the next question we've got here is, how can I differentiate between stress and trauma? And when should I see a therapist versus work through it?
Stress will real resolve. That's a natural, it will naturally heal. And you're asking kind of the difference of when is it time to take my kid in for stitches
Mm,
versus when
easy.
it is a Band-Aid appropriate, right? And so that's kind of the question that's being asked. And some of that is understanding your kiddo in terms of what looks normal for them. And if it's, the same way that we would take them to a doctor sometimes when it may not need stitches because it just looks deeper, it's beyond our scope.
Sure.
And we put no shame on that whatsoever. And the doctor, you go in and the doctor's like, oh, we can just, do a quick glue this together and it's fine kind of a thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
We learn in those experiences. And so sometimes it can be that you go to the therapist and they do 3 or 4 sessions and they've got the skills that they need and they're like, oh, okay, I'm fine, right? And we think therapy sometimes needs to be this long drawn out process. Sometimes it's just going and getting a couple of skills, even as the parent or as the kid, to be able to assess it and go, oh, I know how to take care of this in the future. Then I can just do this type of thing in the future. And so I would say, when in doubt, probably go and seek the professional help, because it may not, if we can get it early enough on, right? This is, again, some of this is just learning this. I remember I had one kiddo, one of my children, who was really prone to pink eye.
Mm.
And I have three biological children. And I have what we call him our bonus kid that came on later when he joined us and when he was about 14. But anyways, that's a whole nother story. But my other 2 kids were not prone to pink eye. And so I just got used to noticing small things that I would see her do that would alert me, like, oh, pink eye's coming on.
Mm.
Right. And so we could just call the doctor up and we'd be like, hey, can you get us the prescription for pink eye? Therapy is a lot the same way. You might have one kiddo that's just more prone to not being able to manage stress. And so it could be stress, but they're just not equipped with what they need in that moment to be able to do it. And they need the support to get through that more stressful situation. Right.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that kiddo because they can't manage, certain types of stress, the same way there's nothing wrong with my kiddo that is more prone to pink eye.
Mm-hmm.
It's recognizing in the individual child what those patterns look like.
Okay. What happens when the kids don't want therapy? Parents
Who
think
wants to go to
kids
the
need
doctor?
therapy, and the
Mm-hmm.
kids are like, I don't want to go. I'm fine. I don't need therapy.
What's the conversation we're having around what therapy looks like? And it's not just the conversations in general. It's like when we're talking about social media, when we're normalizing taking care of our mental health, right? Like if we were just talking about the doctor as a super scary place and we only talked about the needles that you were experiencing at the doctor, right? And we were talking about going to the doctor in kind of a terrifying way, and you're going to have to go do really hard things at the doctor's and it's going to hurt and all that. Who wants to go do that, right? And so part of it is just the way that we're approaching, in general, talking about it. What types of shows are we talking about with or watching, or what kind of, and if we're actively looking at our mental well-being, right? Then going to somebody to talk about our mental well-being and developing that even further, there's less stigma around that. And so some of that is, we can head that off now. And it's not that nobody comes to a therapist to get fixed, because there's nothing broken about a human being. You come to learn skill sets, and any therapy, whether it's physical therapy, mental health therapy, occupational therapy, any therapy, they're designed to work the therapist out of a job, right? We're designed to give you the skills to be able to manage this yourself. And
Okay.
so approaching it from that standpoint, that you're coming into therapy to learn some skills to be able to manage this area of vulnerability for yourself in the future,
Okay.
right? And so it's a really empowering experience to be able to do that. And again, if we're it depends on how we're talking about it and how we're framing it. Do we frame, if they had to go to physical therapy, would be like, oh, that's going to be scary and that's going to be hard and that's going to hurt. Well, it is going to hurt. Anybody who's done physical therapy knows that that's going to hurt at times. But you see the progress and you celebrate the progress.
Okay. So maybe parents who have children who are resistant to therapy can focus on the outcome and how, yeah, it is work, but this is where
Mm-hmm.
you'll be able to get, or this is our
Go
end
ahead.
goal.
Sure. And again, curiosity.
Sure.
Why don't they want to go to therapy?
Yeah.
If they think it's because they're going to go in and they have to fix themselves,
Mm-hmm.
right? Well, if the narrative is that you're broken, I'd want to
Mm-hmm.
prove I'm not broken,
Mm-hmm. But what if
right?
they're
And
saying, what if they're saying like, I just don't want to go talk to a stranger about my feelings?
okay, I'm not gonna,
Then leave
right?
it, like
Like
let it
that can
go.
let it go, and
Okay.
then I think you keep dropping that idea that sometimes the same way that we go see a doctor when other things are not working, or we go see feelings are the same way. Feelings are simply this. It's the way we think feelings are this really big, complex. Feelings are your mind's best guess at how you're experiencing your environment.
Mm.
Feelings are not truth. They're not fact. They don't tell you how to act next. They don't tell you a truth about yourself or a truth about somebody else. They're telling you about how you're experiencing your environment. It's your best guess. And
Wow.
it's shaped by our experiences, right? And so if I came in, I had a surgery that affected my olfaction system, and all of a sudden I was really repulsed by the smell of garlic.
Mm.
And I mean, I could smell it a mile away. It
Garlic's in
was
everything.
awful.
That must have been
It
rough.
is. It was really disruptive, right?
Yeah.
And excuse me. And so I had to go about trying to figure out how to retrain this process because it was something really brand new. And I didn't know how to explain it. At first, I couldn't put words to it. I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
understand. Like, I just would get nauseous and I was like, what is
Mm-hmm.
going on? Right. And I had to start to figure that out. Feelings can do that. My body almost felt repelled by garlic. And it wasn't anything, it just was a surgery that like rewired something in my brain because I didn't have an allergy response to it or anything like that. Feelings can have that same type of repelling experience. And so then we think that must be bad. And so I want to stay away from it. And we don't
Sure.
approach it, right? When we can look at a feeling and something triggers that, right? That trigger in, like, for me, for garlic, right? It was coming from all over the place. And I had to start to narrow it in. Oh, it's garlic that's happening, right? And feelings can be similar where somebody says something, or even a smell can trigger a feeling that feels unsafe, right? That feels uncomfortable. And so then we want to run from that feeling versus going, what is happening right now, right? And taking a look at the feeling. We think feelings tell us truth. When you're arguing with a partner and they say that one thing that can just be totally triggering to you,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because maybe it was your former partner's go-to move, and your former partner wasn't an emotionally safe person for you, and you have the same emotional response to whatever that is, right? Whatever that may be. It could
Right.
be, I don't like the color blue, right?
Mm-hmm.
It could be as simple as that, and it triggers something in you that feels defensive. What do you mean? I put on this dress that's blue because I thought that, and all of a sudden there's this internal narrative happening that I'm not lovable enough, or I'm not enough, or they don't find me attractive, or they don't, like, all of a sudden, and none of that if you stop for a second and take a look at who you're interacting with. Is this person emotionally safe with me, for me? Do they want my best interest? Are they trying to hurt me right now? Right? And when we can slow it down and take a look at that and recognize feelings are just our mind's best guess at how we're experiencing our environment, doesn't mean it's true.
You really brought that back to the initial grounding exercise. This whole mind, body, we are kind of wandering through this earth, experiencing it, and then and then assigning meaning to our experiences that we're having.
Yes.
And isn't that like what it means to be human?
Yes. But we because the brain is designed to be quick, right? And be fast, we get these narratives or these stories that fit often, right? Like they fit often, but they're not always right.
Sure. Yeah. I like it. I like it a lot. Okay, we're over time, but let me get to one more question from our group. What are some ways that I can improve my emotional resilience and my children's emotional resilience so that we can improve our communication and build on our relationship?
Could you read that first part to me one more time? What is the way
want
that
to
I can
improve their emotional resilience and their children's emotional resilience?
I think the best way, again, I'm going to say put your own mask on first, and that's just going to naturally default to your children seeing this modeled for you. So I'm always going to start with you as the individual, and the emotional resilience with it's really emotional awareness. It's not that I can be, because when something is hurting, right? I can't build resilience against pain. I can build an awareness, and then I can attend to that, right? And I'll go back to the example of my knee with hurting. For the longest time, for 3 weeks, I was attending to my hip, and I wasn't stopping any of the pain. But then when I finally tuned into that it was my knee, and I started icing my knee, I can't build resilience. It's swollen, it's inflamed, right? I can't build resilience around that. I first have to tend to it and take care of it and feel it, right? And so sometimes you have to you're building what we call emotional tolerance skills so that you can sit with with that a little bit more. And there's a number of exercises that will help you to do that. And the one what we just did, those grounding exercises, those can actually, whether it's called a coping skill, a grounding exercise, an emotional tolerance skill, it's depending on how you're using it.
Okay.
And so when you're in the fight and you find yourself screaming, it's an emotional deregulation skill. You're bringing yourself down, right? When you want to be able to sit and tolerate that distress a little bit more, practicing that skill is now what we call an emotional resilience building skill or a coping skill, right? And so it can be the same thing, but it's the intention behind it or how you're using it. The same way that we use a hammer to both build things and to take things apart. We use coping skills and emotional de-escalation skills. They're the same skills, just how we're using it in the different moments. And that's something that you can work on with your therapist. They'll be teaching you a bunch of those different types of skills. And so, right, I showed you one of them, but a different therapist will have different ones of those. And that's why it's important to go to those, because we can give you those and you can get a lot of those out of books, and there's videos online and all that. And those are great tools, but sometimes you need the in-person one-on-one type of a thing that you're doing the same way that if you went to a physical therapist, we can go and I can get online and I can do all kinds of exercises for my shoulder. And those are wonderful, right? But sometimes it's a specific enough issue that I need someone to show me how to do it on my shoulder.
Absolutely.
Right. And so this is where the self-help books are great. The podcasts are great, but sometimes you need to go and sit across, and it can be as short as like 5 sessions, and you can get the skills that you need to be able to go to the next level of learning that you are ready to move on to. And this is a learning about ourselves is a lifelong journey. And so it could be that you need 5 sessions now, and in 5 years you need another 10 sessions, right? With somebody different. It's not like a one size fits all, or you could find one therapist that works for great with you, and you just are able to use that therapist until either you retire or they retire, kind of a thing, right? So same thing with like a doctor or a physical therapist, right? Sometimes it makes sense to use the same one. Sometimes it makes sense to go to someone else.
Love it. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And how do people find you?
Not very easily, because I'm not very accessible at the moment. I've been in forensic for so long that I've been referred. They can reach me on my phone number, which I can. I think I sent that over, and you guys can link that in.
Post it? Okay.
Yeah. You're welcome to post my phone number. That's
so
the easiest way.
You're moving from forensic to private practice?
Yeah. I moved. I was working in the prisons for a long time.
Oh, wow.
And then I've worked a lot with referral sources like probation, parole, DCS, that type of thing.
Yes.
And so come from a lot of those areas.
Okay, so you can handle complex trauma. Like,
oh yeah,
I mean, if our divorce problems are going to seem very small compared to what your clients have probably dealt with.
Yeah, we're talking, most of the things that I deal with are like the really deep embedded personality disorders and how those show up in relationships and really difficult, like sexual abuse. That's one of my areas of specialty. And working with offenders and with their families and with the victims actually as well, because healing that system. And so, and embedded in that are a lot of the personality disorders and things of that nature. And so still have my hand in the forensics, but I haven't had, you don't have to be very accessible in forensics because referrals come
you
to
don't want to be accessible,
and so,
right? You're just
right.
Okay, well, we will make
and
sure.
So I'm still building a profile that way.
Perfect. And I appreciate you coming on and answering these questions. There was a lot more, so maybe we'll have you back and you can answer some more of people's questions. But I really appreciated it. Thank you for all the time, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Billie.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening to the Modern Arizona podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, make sure to download it, like it, leave a review, and share it with your friends. If you know someone who would be a good guest or you would like to be on the Modern Arizona podcast, make sure to give us an email or reach out to us at mymodernlaw.com.